Today's case is a shocking and disturbing example of what can happen when young children are used as weapons. Someone who only cares about themselves and making those around them suffer anytime they're done wrong. And that is the absolute kind of person you can find yourself in a relationship with. This case is heartbreaking, disturbing, and will truly have you questioning who you can trust. But before we get into the case, I want to talk about one way that we can all help keep ourselves safe and healthy, and that starts with the water you're drinking every day. We've always been told to make sure that we're drinking enough water every day, especially where I live in Arizona. But shockingly, water can be the very thing that's making so many people sick. According to the U.S. Center for Disease Control, 1.1 million Americans get sick every year from the germs in their tap water. With how much water I drink in a day, that is risky business. So that's why I personally switched to Cove Pure. Cove Pure's filtration system eliminates up to 99.9% of impurities in your water. It works by removing heavy metals, microplastics, forever chemicals, and arsenic. It delivers the purest, crispiest, freshest, best tasting water ever. Cove Pure sits right on your countertop and works seamlessly. No plumbing or drilling needed. It's the perfect solution for renters such as myself who just want a simple plug-and-play solution. It comes with a removable pitcher, making it easy to pour your purified water without needing to go back and forth between the machine. That makes it just that much more convenient for filling up your glass or using the water for cooking. Cove Pure is so confident in their filtration system that they sent me this chlorine drop test to prove just how clean their water is. One cup is filled with sink water while the other is Cove Pure water. With this test, if it turns yellow, that means there's chlorine in it. If it's still clear, that means there's no chlorine. Look at the difference between the tap water and the filtered water. It's night and day. So if you want to enjoy clean, crisp water to keep yourself healthy and hydrated, give Cove Pure a try out for yourself. Go ahead and scan the QR code or go to covepure.com/RachelShannon to get $200 off your system. Once again, that's covepure.com/RachelShannon for a whopping $200 off. Thank you again so much to Cove Pure for partnering with me on today's video. With that being said, let's get into today's tragic case. Fiona and Paul Donnison were both working at Lloyd's of London, an insurance company, when they first met in 1999. At the time, they were both married and each had 2 children. That year, Paul was getting ready to leave the company for a new job, so as a goodbye, Fiona invited Paul out for a drink. For the 3 years that followed, the two maintained a friendship, but eventually it grew into something more, and by 2003, the pair started a romantic relationship. Then, after only a few months into their relationship, by the summer of 2003, Fiona gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Mia. Now, because of how fast things had been moving in their relationship, Paul and Fiona and their respective spouses were all still entangled with one another. Paul was still living with his ex-wife Linda and their 2 children. Meanwhile, I believe Fiona was moved out of the home she once shared with her ex-husband Derek, and the 2 shared custody of the children. But now that Fiona and Paul had a daughter of their own, Paul began splitting his time between his 2 families. For the time being, this seemed to work out for them. But tragically, by April 15th, 2004, the couple were met with a devastating blow. 999 received a call in which a hysterical and distressed Fiona reported that her 8-month-old daughter was unconscious and non-responsive. When first responders arrived, they made every effort to save this baby girl, but it was already too late. 8-month-old baby Mia had died. When authorities first learned of Mia's tragic death, they raised an eyebrow at her mother, Fiona. Turns out, Paul wasn't home at the time of Mia's death. He was at his ex-wife's birthday party when the tragedy occurred. Officers wondered if there was any possibility that Fiona was responsible for Mia's death. Maybe she was so furious at her baby daddy for attending that party that she acted out in the most extreme way possible. But upon later examination, it was ruled that she died as a result of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. SIDS is basically explained by the sudden and unexpected death of an otherwise healthy infant. There was no evidence to suggest that anything else had happened. So at that time, a judge ruled that Fiona could not be charged with Mia's death. It seemed more likely that this was a tragic, horrific accident. No matter what the cause of Mia's death was, the tragedy only brought Paul and Fiona closer. By early 2005, Paul finally moved in with Fiona, saying that he wanted them to be there for each other after experiencing such an extraordinary loss. For the years that followed, Paul and Fiona stayed together and continued trying to grow their family. That same year, in 2005, Fiona found herself pregnant once again, but tragically, she suffered a miscarriage. Then, finally, by August of 2006, the couple gave birth to their second child, a son named Harry. Paul went on to explain that Harry's arrival only made them closer as a couple. He was a happy little baby who was so very loved by his parents. Less than 2 years later, by January of 2008, the couple then gave birth to a daughter, Elise. From there, their household was described as so very happy, loving, and full of laughter. They were a happy family. It was described that both Harry and Elise were affectionate and well-behaved, though Harry did have a mischievous side to him, which sometimes got him in trouble. They both attended nursery school from the time they were babies, and any staff who worked with them absolutely adored them. But of course, as within any family, no matter how happy, there was some stress and tension. The two were living in a £500,000 home in Heathfield, Sussex, England, with their 2 young children, as well as Fiona's 2 teenage children from her previous marriage. Fiona always described herself as the breadwinner of the family, as she held a high-paying job as a credit manager at the insurance company. According to those who knew her, she was very outspoken about how proud she was to be a city worker with a high salary. It was a huge part of her identity. She was known to love the finer things in life, sometimes spending beyond her means and making it more difficult to afford their day-to-day lives with how much she liked to spend. So, as you can imagine, when Fiona lost her job in 2009, she was devastated. She always truly believed that she was very much needed by her company, and being well off was a huge part of who she was. Losing her job was a massive blow to her ego, and the stress of this really took a toll on her relationship with Paul. Paul would later explain that Fiona had always been a bit aggressive, blunt, and controlling. He knew there was a lot of problems within their relationship, but he always stuck around for the sake of the children. I want to note that the pair never got married, but Fiona did have her last name legally changed to his. By September 1st, 2009, Paul returned home from work only to find that the house he shared with Fiona was practically empty. Fiona packed up all of their stuff and left the home with Elise, Harry, and her 2 older children. Paul would later explain that he ran around that house in utter shock and disbelief. He couldn't comprehend what was happening to him. He had no idea where anyone was. He didn't know if Fiona had taken the kids out of the country or even if the kids were with Fiona. Of course, Paul desperately tried calling Fiona, and when she eventually picked up, she told him that she and the kids were in Scotland. She teased him that he would never be able to find her or the kids because he was never getting them back. But Paul knew Fiona well enough at the time to realize that this was a power move. Fiona was trying to exert her control over him by taking the kids. If she had control over the kids, she had control over him, and he knew that. Eventually, he realized that Fiona had actually moved into a new home, which she was renting out in Lightwater, Surrey, located within 100 meters of Paul's ex-wife, Linda's home. Upon this discovery, Paul finally got to see his kids. And even though he was sick of Fiona's immature, toxic ways, he started working with her to rebuild their relationship. He thought that if he could try and mend things between them, maybe they could work out and finally be a stable, happy, loving family. But that isn't what happened. Fiona was initially very much willing to work through things with Paul. She was kind, welcoming, and understanding. As time passed, though, she went right back to her old ways, her toxic, controlling, and possessive ways. Paul later explained that she would go hot and cold. She would lead him on this merry dance, promising that things would be better, but it never stayed that way. It always went right back to where it was, and Paul was getting sick and tired of being used and manipulated. As all of that was happening, Paul ended up reconnecting with an old friend from high school, Allison Shimmons. The two started messaging back and forth, and eventually they began hanging out. And we know how it goes when Paul starts hanging out with some other female one-on-one. Now, Paul claims that when the two first started talking, it was strictly platonic. They were just friends who were reconnecting. But it appears that at least Fiona thought that it could be more than that, especially because she had been in the same position. She was friends with Paul for 3 years before they started dating, and this was seeming like a very similar situation. There were at least 2 occasions in which Paul and Allison were hanging out when Fiona would show up unexpectedly. From here, her controlling and possessive behaviors grew worse and worse, so finally, by January of 2010, Paul accepted that his relationship with Fiona was broken beyond repair. He finally broke up with Fiona, making it clear that their relationship was officially over. They were no longer a couple. And as you probably expected, to absolutely nobody's shock or surprise, as soon as he broke up with Fiona, he and Allison began a romantic relationship. Again, he said that the romance between them only began after he ended things with Fiona, but you don't just go from being platonic friends to a romantic relationship within days immediately after breaking up with your significant other, unless there's some pretext there. Just saying. This doesn't make what Fiona did right or justified in any way. It's just frustrating to see these types of behaviors and people trying to justify them. I mean, you knew you were going to be in a relationship with this woman, even if you weren't already. You knew where this friendship was leading. But either way, by January 16th, Paul left the UK and headed to the United States for a work trip, returning by January 24th. That evening, he visited his children and gave them some gifts that he had picked up for them in the US. According to Paul, Harry was in his pajamas when Paul arrived. Harry ran to him and wrapped his arms around him, giving him a big hug, showing him how much he missed his dad. After that, he went into Elise's room, giving her a peck on the cheek, causing her to wiggle her nose in response, but not waking her up. But what was supposed to be a sweet moment between a father and his children ended up leaving Paul with a knot in his stomach. Because as that was happening, he looked behind him to see that Fiona was standing in the hallway with a look of absolute hatred on her face. She almost looked evil in that moment. So resentful, so sinister. It sent a shiver down his spine and left him feeling uneasy. Despite that wrenching feeling in his gut, though, he never could have guessed what Fiona would do. Sure, she had been toxic and controlling, and it was clear to Paul that she was not happy with him ending their relationship. But she never hurt the children. She had always loved them and cared for them so much despite anything that happened between them. He never could have guessed that her hatred towards him would drive her to use her own children as her final act of retaliation against Paul. By around 10:45 a.m. on the morning of January 27, 2010, officers watched as a woman walked into the Heathfield police station in East Sussex. She walked up to one of the first officers she saw and plainly stated, "I've come to hand myself in. I've just killed my children." It was Fiona Donnison, and immediately officers noticed that she was very pale and was speaking very quietly and slowly. She looked so out of it that she almost appeared drunk. It was very hard to make out what she was saying at that time. As that happened, officers noticed that she had blood on her palms with a deep gash across her left wrist. Then, suddenly, she keeled over and grabbed her stomach as a very tense and scrunched up look appeared on her face. She then let out the most horrific noise before collapsing. Officers rushed over to her to lend help, quickly getting her to paramedics. They bandaged up the cuts on her wrist before she was taken to the hospital for further treatment. It was at the hospital where staff found that Fiona had taken an overdose of Nytol sleeping pills. As Fiona was being treated at the hospital, officers started their desperate searches for Fiona's children. They ended up looking around the area of her home in Heathfield for around 45 minutes before finding her car, which had been parked a few streets away. When they finally found her car, they broke through the window to unlock the car and open the trunk. In that trunk, officers saw that there were 2 sports bags. They opened each bag, and inside, they found the bodies of 3-year-old Harry and 18-month-old Elise. Each of them had been wrapped in trash bags before they were placed into separate sports bags. Officers quickly removed their bodies from the bags and attempted to bring them back, but it was clear right away that both Harry and Elise were deceased and had been for quite a while. In that car, officers also discovered what appeared to be a suicide note that Fiona had apparently written to her 2 older teenage children. In part, it said, "By the time you have received this, I will have gone to be with Harry, Elise, and Mia. I'm sorry I won't be there to see you grow up. I loved you all more than life itself. Please remember all the good times we all had. I will watch over you in heaven. I'm so sorry that Paul made your lives so miserable. He was a bad choice for all of you. I will always love you forever." By that point, it was clear to officers that Fiona had murdered her 2 youngest children, then attempted to take her own life by taking over-the-counter sleeping pills. But for whatever reason, instead of going through with taking her own life, she went to the police station to confess.
43-year-old Fiona Donnison is to be questioned in connection with the murder of 2 of her children. Little Elise Donnison is described on an internet site by her mother as her beautiful daughter. The 2-year-old's body was found next to that of her brother Harry, who was 3. Their deaths uncovered on Wednesday when their mother walked into a police station in East Sussex saying she wanted to report an incident. The child's bodies were found in zipped-up sports bags. The car has been taken away for forensic tests. This neighbour is shocked.
Dreadful. I mean, it was evident of something very serious, but no news until the news last night. So. And it just leaves you thinking, well, had you noticed anything? Might it have been different, but didn't. So it's just very, very, very sad.
Police are piecing together what seems to be a tragic family history. The Donnisons lived here in East Sussex until just before Christmas, when Fiona split from the children's father and the house was sold. The police station Mrs. Donnison walked into has also been cordoned off, and flowers have been laid where the children's bodies were found.
After being treated at the hospital, Fiona was released back into police custody. Meanwhile, the bodies of little Harry and Elise were being transported to the medical examiner for an autopsy, and detectives in this case began their investigation into what exactly happened. Of course, investigators quickly got into contact with the father of these 2 children, Paul, to notify them that his children had been killed. Obviously, he was completely devastated and heartbroken, but he was able to tell officers pretty much exactly why this happened. He explained the details of his 8-year-long relationship with Fiona, how she had always been very controlling, demanding, and hot-headed. He said that the 2 had just recently broken up and he immediately started seeing a new woman. He told them how just 3 days prior he had visited his children for the last time, and all he saw from Fiona was a look of pure hatred on her face. Then, as we heard from before, Fiona had just recently left the home in Heathfield and started renting a new home in Surrey. Based on this, police were able to track her movements from the evening of January 26th. They found that between 5 and 6 p.m. that day, she was traveling on the highway in the direction of Lightwater. By 6:16 p.m., the home alarm system at the Lightwater house was turned off, and at 6:54 p.m., she called the bank. A few hours later, by 9:20 p.m., she then set the alarm on the house. 10 minutes after that, she was seen on CCTV footage at a local Sainsbury's store buying multiple bottles of painkillers and sleeping pills. 15 minutes after that, she was seen at a Tesco store buying a bottle of water and more painkillers. By 11:05 p.m., her phone had been shut off. Based on this and the results of the autopsy, it's thought that at some point that night, most likely between 6:16 p.m. and 9:20 p.m., Fiona murdered her 2 children in the Lightwater home by smothering them with a pillow. After murdering them, she placed them in the back of her trunk and drove around to those various stores to buy sleeping pills and painkillers. She then drove to the home in Heathfield where she expected Paul to be that night, since that is where he had been living after the separation. It was found that she had brought 2 kitchen knives with her into that house, which she had grabbed from the house in Lightwater. Armed with those 2 kitchen knives, she sat in the kitchen of that home and waited for Paul to return. Police believe that she was planning on killing Paul so that she could blame the deaths on him. But he didn't return home that night. Instead, he went to his new girlfriend's house and spent the night there. So, after lying in wait all night, only for him to never return, she initially decided to just OD on pills to take her own life, but for some reason, this turned into her going to the police station to instead turn herself in. After all of that, Fiona was arrested and charged with the 2 murders. But of course, she pleaded not guilty, saying that she was mentally ill at the time and didn't realize what she was doing. From there, she was examined by forensic psychologists to determine if she was truly insane at the time of the murders.
A mother under arrest, 2 children found dead. Glass lies on this normally quiet, leafy street in East Sussex. The results of officers forcing their way into a parked car, where they found the bodies of a boy and a girl, both believed to be under the age of 5. The 43-year-old mother, named by sources as Fiona Donnison, taken to a nearby hospital. It was her who raised the alarm, travelling a short distance from the car to Heathfield Police Station. Chief Superintendent Robin Smith.
She was clearly suffering from some distress as a result of what she said to us. Members of my team went to a nearby car, very close to the police station in fact, and inside that car, tragically, very sadly, they found 2 young children, we believe both under the age of 5.
Last night, the children's mother taken to a hospital in Eastbourne to treat what police believe to have been self-inflicted wounds. It is also thought that she came from Surrey, a family connection police said in Heathfield, where a shocked community are coming to terms with the news.
For the year and a half that followed, investigation continued as Fiona awaited her trial in jail. By July 11th of 2011, now 46-year-old Fiona's trial for the murders of her 2 young children, Harry and Elise, began. The prosecution claimed that Fiona is a cold-blooded killer who murdered her 2 youngest children to get back at Paul. They explained that she had spent the entirety of their relationship trying to make Paul as miserable as possible. She was controlling, possessive, and toxic, but again, Paul put up with it for the sake of his children. After she took off with the kids in 2009 and moved into the new home in Lightwater, Paul knew that his relationship was coming to an end. Although he tried making it work for a bit longer, he just couldn't deal with her manipulation anymore, so he officially broke it off with her. However, a few months before breaking it off with her, Paul got into contact with an old school friend, and that made Fiona go crazy. She was convinced that he was cheating regardless of if he actually was or not. Then he continued seeing this woman after the breakup, and Fiona couldn't handle it. So after years of trying to make his life miserable, trying anything and everything to keep him under her grasp, she knew that he was finally gone. So in a final act of revenge, she hurt him in the most violent, extreme way possible. taking his children away meant that he would be suffering the immense, excruciating pain for the rest of his life. The prosecution explained everything that I've told you up to this point about the entirety of the relationship, the CCTV footage, and the timeline leading up to her confession. Then, of course, the confession itself. They said that after being arrested, she was seen by a psychologist who diagnosed her with a narcissistic personality. She had an inflated sense of self-worth and lacked empathy for others, including her own children. She failed to see the wrong in her actions, even in murdering her own children. All the while, she only ever saw the wrong in the actions of those around her. They said that Fiona murdered her 2 children in cold blood by smothering them, then fully intended on murdering Paul as well so that she could blame the murders on him. This was a deliberate, thought-out plan that was only affected by Paul not returning home that night. If he had returned home, this may have been a very different case. On the other hand, her defense said that she was actually suffering from severe depression in the months leading to the murders. She had been under extreme stress. She was laid off from her job, which really took a toll on her mental well-being. She then started to suspect that she was being cheated on, and when her fears were confirmed and her relationship came to an end, she snapped. She was under such stress and was so mentally unstable that she acted out in a state of mental insanity and didn't realize what she was doing. The defense was arguing that she should be found not guilty due to reason of diminished responsibility. At the end of the trial, both sides made their closing arguments and the jury was off for deliberation. And in the end, the jury found that Fiona Donnison is in fact responsible for the murders of her children. She acted out of rage and jealousy and used her 2 babies as weapons against Paul. Due to this, she was found guilty of their murders. Of course, Paul told the courts just how badly this whole thing has affected him. He has to live the rest of his life without his 2 precious babies who he loved so very much. Fiona is an evil monster who deserves the same fate that she inflicted on her babies. She deserves death. But in the end, her life was spared. Instead, she was given a life sentence with a minimum of 32 years spent behind bars. And after all this came out about how she murdered her 2 children, officers went back and reinvestigated the death of 8-month-old little Mia. It wasn't a stretch to think that this woman, who was very clearly capable of horrendously murdering her 2 toddlers, could have done the same to her baby years earlier. After all, as I stated, Mia was found dead while Paul was at a birthday party for his ex-wife. That seemed like something that could possibly make Fiona mad enough to do the same thing to her baby. Due to this, investigators asked the courts to charge her again with murdering Mia, but they actually threw out this case at that time. Once again, even though she is now convicted of killing her 2 children, there still isn't enough evidence to say that she murdered Mia. So as of right now, we truly don't know what happened to that baby girl. But that is where this case sits as of right now. Of course, this is yet another tragic, devastating case that never should have happened. All too often, these monsters see their own children as nothing but weapons to use against their partners or ex-partners. They are pawns in whatever game they're playing to try and make their ex or current partner miserable. And personally, I do think this is exactly what Fiona did. She had a history of acting out, especially as we saw when she packed up and took the kids away and moved right down the street from Paul's ex-wife. That definitely seems like something she did for attention. I mean, what other reason is there? Then, when she realized that Paul was gone for good, she wanted to make him suffer, and that is all she had on her mind. She wasn't thinking about her babies. She wasn't thinking about the consequences it would have on her other children. All she cared about in that moment was making Paul suffer. And she got what she wanted. But now she has to live the rest of her life with the consequences of what she has done. But that's what I think about this case, and now I want to hear from you all. Do you think Fiona did this for revenge, or was she truly depressed and didn't realize what she was doing? Do you think the sentence she got was long enough? Let's discuss this and any other thoughts you have in the comments below. If you like this video, please make sure to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn the notification bell too on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. If you want the cleanest, freshest, crispiest water, make sure you also go ahead and go to covepure.com/RachelShannon to get $200 off your system. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time.